Thank you for joining us for our first Facebook Live event of the spring 2019 semester. We are here today with the producers of Dig, a history podcast. We have Dr. Sarah Hanley Cousins and Elizabeth Mazurek. Dr. Cousins is a recent graduate of the history department and currently is one of our professors. And Elizabeth Mazurek is one of our amazing PhD students.
Amazing. Yeah.
You were amazing when you were here too. You've just graduated. But you guys are the producers of Dig, a history podcast. How did that get going? What are the origins?
Do you want the long story or the short story?
Well, it started initially, very initially started as sort of a project undertaken by a larger group of graduate students in 2015, right?
Yeah. There's 7 of us.
And we had this, I shouldn't say we, I wasn't even involved in it from the very beginning, but there was this idea that we were going to have a podcast about life as a grad student.
Yeah.
And then we sort of realized that that's
Boring.
That's boring. Yeah, nobody wants to listen.
Nobody
to
listens
right?
to a bunch of people complaining about how hard their life
Right,
is.
exactly. And so we sort of figured out as we were going that what we enjoyed most, the episodes we enjoyed doing most were these kind of narrative storytelling sort of episodes. And so we eventually kind of leaned into that, and a smaller group of us kind of went forward.
Did you just use lean in?
We leaned into that. we decided to grasp that.
We ran into it.
Yes. But a smaller group of us decided to kind of take that aspect of it and to morph it into this second project, which was Dig. And so we launched in October 2017.
2017, yeah.
So who are the producers at this time? You said you started with a large group of grad students.
Yeah.
Who are your core producers?
So it's Elizabeth and I, and Averill Earls, who graduated from the department in 2016, and Marissa Rhodes, who's also a graduate student in the department. It's the 4 of us.
So how would you define Dig? You have all of these really great projects, from cannibalism to Black Cowboys to Victorian imperialism. What is Dig, though? Is it an academic podcast? Is it popular history, public history?
Yes.
It is all of the above. It is it is history for the public done in a scholarly way.
Yeah.
So how do you choose your topics?
So we choose a theme.
Yeah.
And we do series of 4, right? So, this one that we're doing right now is bodies, right? So anything within bodies,
And we're
all
really
4
broad.
of us, all 4 of us can choose a topic. And then each one of us is responsible for researching, writing the copy for that episode.
Mm-hmm.
And then we pair up and we present it with another person in the podcast.
Right.
But I mean, as far as like choosing things, it's really like whatever we're interested in the moment.
Yeah, and so sometimes it can be a response to the news. Like we have an upcoming sex series that's going to be after our bodies series. That was a response. We planned that way back during the Kavanaugh hearings, to be sort of a response to that in a way. But other ones were just like, hey, I really want to do an episode about polar exploration. Let's do something on environmental history, or it can be just sort of something that excites us in the moment.
I found something today. I was doing a little research and I read about a Tom Thumb wedding.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Do you know what it is? Okay, I was like, what is this? Google, and I was like, I'm going to do a podcast on this. So stay tuned if you want to know what a Tom Thumb wedding is.
Sometimes it's stuff like that in the course of getting ready for a lecture or working on an episode for something, or even just reading a new book, you come across some wacky story and you're like, wait a second, like it's a perfect venue for us to kind of dig into some look at that branding to dig into some topic that otherwise wouldn't fit into our day, right?
Yeah.
So how similar or different is preparing the podcast from lecturing? Because you are one of our faculty members, Elizabeth. I know you've taught as a TA and as an instructor. How similar or different is this?
That's a really good question.
I find it very similar.
I would say it's very similar, except recently my approach has changed a little bit, not a lot. But when we first started, I wrote them my copy for the episodes exactly how I write a lecture, which is bullet points. And because I already sort of have an idea in my brain of where I'm going with my lecture, and so I have sort of it's like more of a map than it is a script, right? And so that's how I started writing the podcast episodes. But then we wanted to have transcriptions on the website. So we started writing them out as actual scripts. So in that sense, it's changed a little bit. But in terms of topic or the way that they tell the story,
since we started though.
What? Writing them out?
Writing them out, like
yeah, but I mean, like way back, I started it.
Okay.
All my copy was in bullet points.
Okay. Which would be how you would write a lecture.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in that sense, yes, it is different.
Yeah. But in terms of the storytelling.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, of course, in a lecture, maybe you might be doing something a little more broad.
Right.
Right. Or a little more topical, whereas this, we might kind of dig a little deeper into one little, story.
A little more focused sometimes. Yeah. But yeah, I try to make it be accessible in the same way that you try to make a lecture be accessible to students. Right.
Right.
So we're in this moment of history where there is a tension between traditional academia, where you're writing articles or writing monographs. You have a forthcoming monograph, you just published an article, versus digital history, where we are turning more towards podcasts. I know there's a huge forum on Twitter, for example, that's really saying, oh, what podcast are you using for your semester, and using that to teach history. Do you find there to be any tension as you're both within the academic setting but producing, these really great podcasts?
I mean, yes and no. Avril, who is not here with us today, but all of her job talks, all they did were ask her about the podcasts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's yet to see how it'll turn out for Marissa and I when we get on the job market.
Right.
I don't know.
I mean, I've not experienced a lot of negative feedback from my sort of more, I guess, traditional professional kind of networks or contexts. I've found that most people are excited about it and think that it's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think that in a larger sense, maybe not to me or to you personally, but I think there is in a larger sense sometimes a pushback about kind of frivolous history or like not doing the real work. And that's one reason we designed, when we started this project this way, or this iteration of the project, we wanted it to be kind of a coming together of the scholarly and the popular. We didn't want it to be just kind of surface level or too simplified, right? And I think because of I think there is a real demand for that kind of content because people want to put it on their syllabuses.
Yeah.
And if I can kind of boast on us, I think we're really good at putting together that kind of material that you can assign to a class, and it's funny and it's a little bit irreverent sometimes, but your students are still going to get a real introduction to whatever that topic is.
Some core content. I think some of the pushback I've kind of seen, and this is in general, and like historians kind of talking to the general public in general, I think there's this kind of reticence that if you're not a quote unquote expert on that subject, that you somehow don't have authority to talk on it. So, some feedback I got from a superior or advisor or whatever you would call them, we were doing an episode on the War of 1812. And the comment was, well, what do you know about the War of 1812? And I was like, well, wait a minute, I've taught this course before. I've TA'd for it like 17 times and I've taught it on my own, but yet I'm questioned to be able to podcast on it. Yeah. Right. But I think that's like a larger general thing, or, reticence of historians.
We're so siloed.
To dive into, like public discussions about history. Why is it that journalists are oftentimes talking to like political scientists or, policy, think tank people or whatever? Like, why aren't they like literally talking only to historians? Like, you know what I'm saying? And so like to be able to kind of like, all right, I may not be an expert in it, but I know enough to give, an hour-long lecture on it and that kind of thing. And being okay with that, kind of putting yourself out there in, in the public sphere, right?
Yeah. And I mean, this is kind of not to relate it to your question exactly, but that's one of the things I love most about this podcast is that as historians, we often, other than when you're teaching, if you get to teach those bigger, broader classes, you're often just like, you're studying one thing, you're talking to people, you're going to conferences that are about one thing, and you can get like overly focused, and you lose sight of like all of these other weird and interesting things that people are learning. And so recently we did a series on frontiers, and my frontier episode was about space exploration, right? I'm like, I'm a 19th century American historian. What am I have no authority here. But what it meant was that I got to read some absolutely nutso fascinating stuff on theories of space exploration. And now it's like, man, I want to learn more about that. That stuff's great, I've
learned so much from other producers' episodes. Either pairing up with them or just listening. I'm like, I didn't know that existed,
Which only makes us better scholars and makes us better teachers. Honestly, I think it really makes us better teachers.
Very much so. Do you assign dig on any of your syllabi?
I do. I do all the time. Apologies, students. It seems very self-serving, but sometimes we will choose topics because we want to assign them. This series on bodies, we have an episode on leprosy and an episode on syphilis that are probably going to go into my history of medicine syllabus because they're just so perfect for it. And they're a perfect way of getting your students some additional analysis of some subject without having to spend class time on it. Your 14th Amendment episode is perfect. It's always in my Civil War syllabuses because you don't have time to really dig into that one amendment in a way that's really fruitful in class, and the podcast episodes help you to do that. And I know I've spoken to lots of people who assign our episodes, but other podcasts as well, and put them on syllabuses. I think they're really useful.
So I know that I've talked to some undergrads recently who are like, oh, I'm interested in podcasts. What advice do you have for any of our undergrads or graduate students who might be interested in a similar project?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess at the end of the day, just do it.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Just jump into it.
But with the caveat that actually do your research first, because it is very labor intensive. It is a lot of work. It's a very steep learning curve, and I think Dig looks so successful because we figured it out on our older project. Okay, so we made a lot of mistakes, and so that when we started Dig, we were able to launch correctly with a bang. We had a whole lineup. We had like 5 episodes already like recorded and just ready to go. We did it right the second time because we figured out the kinks the first time. So it's a large learning curve, and so do your research.
And it's not just the scholarly research, right? It's not just like the researching the issue. Because a lot of people are interested in I do the history of religion in the U.S. and I'm going to do a podcast on that. And I'm a content expert, so the rest is just going to come along naturally. But it doesn't, right? Like if you launch and your sound quality is bad, like people aren't going to stick with you because it's painful to listen to your podcast. So you need to think a lot about recording equipment, about microphones. I mean, things that we had to figure out for this podcast, like how to attribute images on our website, or how to audit how to edit audio, right? It's not something that we learned in school. We had to figure that out on our own. I still don't know how to do it. I let them do it.
When I say research, I mean
April,
the digital research, and then we have a blog, so it's like search engine optimization and this, that, so I mean there's just a lot, an extra skill set of knowledge that you have to kind of, not to scare people, not to scare people, but just to go into it wide-eyed, knowing like, okay, there are some technical things that I need to figure out, but there's also many free resources that you can learn that information. So if you are interested in it, it is there for you for the taking.
And if you're doing it with a group, if you're doing it with other producers,
don't do it alone.
Doing it by yourself, that's a lot of work. I mean, be very clear-eyed about how much work it's going to take. This project really is time-consuming. And also have clear understandings with your fellow producers about who does what, whose roles. I mean, that took us a little while to nail down, but now we have a good handle on, April and Marissa do the audio editing. Elizabeth really handles the website. I handle images and social media marketing. But none of that comes naturally. You have to have that. And if you don't have all those pieces, it doesn't just come together. It doesn't just happen.
And it's worked out well for you guys. You've won at least one award that I'm aware of. So
Yes.
Yep.
it's worked out really well.
Thank you.
And for anyone interested, I will be putting the link to their website in the comments of this video. But thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you.
And congratulations. I saw you had a new podcast just out.
Yeah,
Or-
we just
is
Sunday
today?
night.
Yeah, Sunday
the syphilis
Yep.
episode is live, and it's a doozy.
night.
I recommend it. Yeah, it's a good one.
But yeah, Sunday nights is one of
Yeah.
our we launch. And you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher,
iTunes,
wherever you
Google
listen
Play.
to your podcasts.
Yes.
And we're at digpodcast.org.
She's very good at pushing the podcast, as you can tell.
Thank you both so much for being here, and thank
Thank
you for
you.
joining us for our Facebook Live event. Join us throughout the semester for more conversations.